Now, I got engaged recently, and did we give out the newsletter from yesterday here? Okay, outside, available for all of you if you'd like it. I do a weekly newsletter which is available at newt.org for free. And this week I did it on the World Trade Center mosque proposal. And I seem to rattle some of our elites and even confuse some of our conservative friends. So let me be quite clear what my reasoning is. The World Trade Center site should be a battlefield memorial because it's a battlefield. This was an act of war. This was an effort to cripple America. I believe we should rebuild the World Trade Center exactly as it was the minute before it was attacked. And in World War II, there would have been zero confusion about this. We would have rebuilt it in 18 months. Because back then we understood how to do things. And imagine the psychology if we had just said that day, it will go back as it was. And it will go back as it was as rapidly as possible. It's a different psychological attitude. But here we are trapped in our own litigation, our own regulation, our own confusion, our own political incompetence. So in 9 years we can't rebuild it. And now we're being told that several blocks away what we should have is a 13-story tall mosque and community center, which I regard as a political act, not a religious act. Now I want to make this quite clear because a number of people seem to be confused when I first raised this issue. There are over 100 mosques in New York City. If they wanted to build their mosque and community center in the South Bronx, I'd be all for it. They need the employment. If they wanted a genuine interfaith center, a building that had a church, a synagogue, and a mosque with an interfaith board, that would at least be interesting. But to suggest that a few blocks from a site in which Islamist extremists killed nearly 3,000 Americans, that we should tolerate an act of triumphalism? And anybody who knew anything of history knew it was an act of triumphalism from their original name. It was going to be called the Cordoba House. Well, Cordoba is the city in Spain where a conquering Muslim army built a mosque on top of a church. Now, do you think they happened to randomly pick that because they were sitting around one evening going, gosh, what would be a good name in New York? And what they were relying on was that half of us are too ignorant and the other half are too timid to stand up and say baloney. This is nonsense. Now, the Congress can declare the area a national battlefield memorial and control what's built there. The Attorney General of New York, if he wanted to, Andrew Cuomo, could intervene and apply a variety of, he's quite capable of messing up any Native American who wants to do something. He could find a way to drag this out 25 years if he wanted to. The city of New York could decide it was an unwise use. But I think it is stunningly outrageous. And the comparison I drew, because I'm frankly very tired of being lectured about religious liberty, and the comparison I drew, which confused some people, was to Saudi Arabia. But I don't see any of the people who advocate the interfaith, the mosque next to the World Trade Center, jumping up and saying, and the Saudi king should build a church and a synagogue in Riyadh. There are none in the entire country. None. Zero. Or they could say, why don't we have an interfaith conference on learning to communicate with each other in Mecca? Where it is, of course, illegal for a Christian or Jew to even walk in the city. So we get this, and over half the mosques in the United States have mortgages held by Saudi Arabia. So we get this totally one-sided, hypocritical lecture about political correctness and the need to worry about religious liberty from people who, in fact, are funded by, and in many, I'm not talking about the specific mosque, I'm talking about the general pattern. And I just think it's time that we in the West had the temerity to stand up and say, enough. We don't need to be lectured by people who represent a totalitarian system. And we don't need to be lectured by people who've been funding those who would kill us. And we don't need to be lectured by people who print textbooks that encourage the killing of Jews and Christians. And so let's go head to head and let's have a real debate. And let's talk about the future of this country and the future of the world. And it ought to be a future. But look around, by the way. Sharia is not just, this is not just a tiny thing. The largest provider of Sharia financing in the world is a government-owned institution, AIG. The state of Minnesota provides Sharia funding for housing. I mean, you turn around and step again and again and again, and what you've had is a steady infiltration of truly destructive ideas, and in the long run it has a very serious threat. Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, said in February of 2008, "It seems unavoidable. Indeed, as a matter of fact, certain provisions of Sharia are already recognized in our society and under our laws. So it's not as if we're bringing in an alien and rival system. We already have in this country a number of situations in which the law, the internal law of religious communities, is recognized by the law of the land as justified, conscientious objections in certain circumstances in providing certain kinds of social relations. So I think we need to look at this with a clearer eye and not imagine either we know exactly what we mean by Sharia and not just associate it with what we read about Saudi Arabia or whatever." This is the Archbishop of Canterbury. And it's why I think teaching about Sharia financing is dangerous, because it is the first step towards the normalization of Sharia, and I believe Sharia is a mortal threat to the survival of freedom in the United States and in the world as we know it. And I think it's that straightforward and that real.